Professor. My name is Kevin Wright. I am in your argumentation class, and this is my exam 1. The first part of our exam does tell us to provide a definition of argumentation and why and explain why we feel that's the best definition. My definition actually did come from our textbook. I added just a little bit to the definition to kind of personalize it a little bit. So the definition is argumentation is a form of instrumental communication relying on reasoning and proof to influence belief and behavior through the use of spoken word or written messages for some sort of greater good for society in the result. The definition that came from our textbook actually I feel uh, was a great definition. What I did want to add to the argument was the idea that the result has to come from the result has to have some sort of greater good for society that's going to help us in the long run. Because after all, we don't want people arguing about something that's not going to change anything. If it's going to just be a pointless argument, it will be a pointless argument. Um, I definitely feel like that's the best representation of what an argument is, as long as it brings the idea of some sort of value to the argument. The argument is going to have value, and the end result is going to have value for a greater good for our society. The second part of our exam, it asks, which argument tradition does your definition best reflect? And my answer to that actually is the fourth tradition that we talked about, which is norm. The fourth was rhetorical. I'm sorry, the rhetorical portion. And the reason I say that is because it asks the question of what effect does the argument have. That's directly ties into my definition, the greater good. What is the greater good that's going to come out of this argument? And I feel like that's the one that will best closely match up to what my definition of argumentation is. There's another characteristic of this particular tradition that matches up well. It's the idea that it focuses on text, context, audience, and large social structures. So again, the idea of finding a greater good for our social structure, this tradition ties directly into my argument. Some of the other ones, the descriptive, it sort of matches up with my argument. However, there are bits and pieces that don't match up. So the descriptive is the primary question it asks, how does the argument operate, and how does the argument affect the social relationship? So the last part of that particular tradition does focus on my argument, the social relationship, how does it affect that? However, the first part of the primary question is, how does the argument operate? And in my definition, there's no focus on the operational part of an argument. And that's why that one sort of fits it, but I did pick the best one as rhetorical. The second tradition, or I'm sorry, the third one is normative. And normative doesn't fit my argument because the primary question is the idea of what is good and what is bad. Um, when you're arguing, each side feels like their side is good, and they feel like their opposing side is the bad side, and that's with any argument. So I can be for the death penalty, and someone can be against it. I feel like my arguments are good, and I feel like the opponent's arguments are always bad. Um, and that's why that one actually doesn't particularly fit into my definition. Another thing for normative is that it evaluates strengths and weaknesses. That's a portion that I guess could say can definitely fit into my argument, because when we're looking at the a greater good for society, we can look at some of the strengths and weaknesses and see what exactly would fit for a particular argument, or I'm sorry, what exactly would work for society and what wouldn't. So what would be strong and what would be weak. But altogether, that one doesn't fit. And the last tradition, which is the logical tradition, the primary question is, what is valid? What's the correct form of reasoning of argument? Again, that sort of ties into that idea of good and bad. Each side will think that their side is valid. But they feel like their argument is the most valid argument that one can actually get. One characteristic of this one is that it focuses on authentic knowledge and scientific knowledge. We're not really looking at for my definition of argumentation, we're not looking at the scientific side. It's more so we're looking at society and finding out what would bring more value and provide a greater good. Um, so the third part of our exam is based on our definition of argument, we have to create a debate, including a resolution. So I've created a debate, and I'm going to be using the Toulmin model of argumentation, and we're gonna go through that, and as far as how to present an argument. So, um, stating my argument. First part, my claim is all individuals 18 years of age should be forced to register to a vote to improve voter turnouts. The grounds for this claim: there is a huge population of 18-year-olds that are not accounted for at the polls because they are not registered to vote or they simply don't care. The warrant for this particular argument: people should force 18-year-olds to register to vote because this will improve voter turnouts and this will improve the people and the policies we actually put into office. The importance of this argument is this is imperative to improve our way of life, voter participation, and mostly improve young people's knowledge on the idea of politics so they can get an all-around grasp of what it means to really put people into office. And restating my claim, and all these reasons are actual reasons why we should force 18-year-olds to register to vote. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and refute that argument. And so my opponents claim that all individuals 18 years of age should be forced to register to vote to improve voter turnouts. My new claim for refuting that argument is 18-year-olds should not be forced to vote because it violates their constitutional rights to choose. The grounds for my claim is forcing 18-year-olds to vote will be the beginning of the end of our idea of democracy. The warrant for that: 18-year-olds should not be forced to vote because it simply won't increase voter turnouts. Registering them to vote, if they don't want to vote, they just won't simply show up to the polls. So this will not directly increase voter turnouts, because if you force an 18-year-old to vote and they don't want to vote, they just won't simply show up to the polls, thus creating the exact same issue that we have going into forcing them to register to vote. And the importance of my claim is by not forcing 18-year-olds to register to vote, it's important because it will deprive them of their right to choose. It will open up a huge can of worms of what can happen next. What else can the government force us to do? And restating my claim, thus the 18-year-olds should not be forced to register to vote because it will not improve voter turnouts. Things that each side is actually going to have to, or obstacles are going to have to overcome. For the side claiming that they should force 18-year-olds to vote, they're going to have to definitely overcome this idea of people are going to feel that we're becoming a society where we're forcing everyone to do things we want them to do. There's no choice that's included in that. And if people don't feel like they can choose, this can quickly turn into a dictatorship country. So they would definitely have to have some kind of arguments to refute that and overcome that obstacle. For the individuals who don't want to force 18-year-olds to register to vote, they're going to have to directly show how this is going to not improve voter turnouts. So they can maybe come up with some kind of evidence that this will not increase the greater good for society. This will not increase voter turnout. Instead, we should focus on other things to help young people want to vote. And on my argument that I'll pick is actually that the side that I want to side with is refuting that 18-year-olds should be forced to vote. And that's because I don't feel like forcing them to register to vote is going to increase voter turnouts. Instead, I think we should focus on making knowledge available to younger kids in order for them to fully understand the importance of voting and what it really means to really look at these laws and change their mindset, as opposed to forcing them to vote so that they can go out and register to vote on their own. So I'm definitely going to go with the defense, or the negative side, that's saying that 18-year-olds should not be registered, should not be forced to register to vote. And I believe I did cover everything, and yeah, that is my exam. Thank you for listening.